Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Janice Butchko, Senior Project Manager for the MDS Foundation. Also joining me is my colleague, Ashley Moncrief, Director of Patient Care. I will be moderating today's webinar. Thank you to our sponsors, ABI, Bristol Myers Squibb, Servier, and Taiho Oncology for supporting this webinar program. Please note, this is a pre-recorded presentation, so the presenter will not be taking any questions. The live questions with answer segment for all participants are included at the end of this presentation. Today's presenter is Brian McMahon. Brian is a four-time cancer caregiver, a recipient of the 40 Under 40 in Cancer Award, an avid musical theater fan, a father of two awesome little girls, and the founder of SparkCures. Over the past 9 years, SparkCures has worked with more than 12,000 blood cancer patients around the country to help them better understand their clinical trial options. Also joining him is Mel McMahon. She is a registered nurse and a member of the SparkCures patient support team. Mel spends her time chasing after her two daughters, reading when she can, and helping blood cancer patients find and navigate their clinical trial options. It is my pleasure to introduce Brian and Mel McMahon.
Hey everyone, my name's Brian, and I'm part of the team here at SparkCures. We're here today to talk about clinical trials. Now, you've gone through and signed up for this webinar, so you've at least heard of the phrase clinical trials before. And everyone is coming into this conversation with different levels of understanding and maybe even different levels of participation in trials. This can be a confusing and difficult topic, so my plan is to break this down into a simple conversation. I don't want anyone listening to feel like they have to become an expert in clinical trials as they make decisions about treatment for their MDS. My goal is to open up these concepts to make you more familiar and more comfortable so you can have these conversations with your doctor, with your family, with the MDS Foundation, as well as our team here at SparkCures. And to put this into perspective, the MDS Foundation was part of a survey of patients that reported back that about 75% of people surveyed were never offered a clinical trial. But a comment that came out of this, and one that we hear over and over and over again, is that people had wished they had more information on possible trials they may qualify for. And this is why we partnered and joined forces with the incredible and wonderful team at the MDS Foundation to bring clinical trial information to all MDS patients and to help them make better, more informed decisions on their care options. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This is my mom. She was one of my best friends, and in 2005, our lives changed forever. She was diagnosed with a blood cancer called multiple myeloma. Unfortunately, they diagnosed her late and with two genetic mutations that put her in the high-risk category, which, by the way, on that same survey I mentioned earlier, over half of all MDS patients were not aware of their risk level, which is an important piece of information for clinical trials. And because of her late diagnosis and high-risk genetics, she received a poor prognosis. And I remember doctors sending her home with a message to start getting her affairs in order. They didn't expect her to live longer than a month. But my mom wasn't your typical patient. She was an oncology nurse with over 3 decades of experience, and she was working at Amgen as a clinical support specialist for Neupogen, which is a medication that helps with low white blood cell counts that many of you may be familiar with. So my mom had both the clinical knowledge, but also the Rolodex that comes with working at one of the largest biopharma companies. And within 2 weeks, she had identified a myeloma center of excellence, as well as a clinical trial that was over 1,000 miles away from our home. That trial gave my mom and my family almost 2 years of additional time. And while it wasn't the outcome that we wanted, it was a lot more than 30 days. Now, all told, my mom ended up having 3 stem cell transplants, 2 autologous, that's using her own cells, and 1 allogeneic, which is using someone else's or a donor's cells. This is a photo of my mom as a patient during her donor stem cell transplant, but it's not how I remember her. Because the clinical trial didn't just give my mom and my family more time. We had our ups and downs as all patients and all families have when going through cancer treatments. But it gave us vacations, dinners, hangouts, lazy Sunday book reading days, and more. And it opened my eyes to the importance of clinical trials. My mom had more time and a higher quality of life because of all the patients that came before her who helped advance research and help bring new drugs to market. And in some small way, she has become part of that for patients today. And over a 10-year period, I was a 4-time cancer care partner, first with my mom, and then my grandmother, my business partner, and then my father-in-law. And of those four, my mom was the only one who was ever offered and who ever joined a clinical trial. And I can remember sitting with my father-in-law, John, in a major cancer center shortly after he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The doctors there never even brought up or mentioned clinical trials. When we asked, they told us that there were no clinical trials, but if we went home and did a search, we could bring our findings back to the next appointment and they would give us advice. So we went home and did a search. And even after we limited our search to the surrounding states, we were still left with hundreds of clinical trials and little to no support in understanding them. I started SparkCures because you shouldn't have to be an oncology nurse or work for a large pharmaceutical company in order to understand your clinical trial options. I knew there was a better way to help people and help their families. Now, if you think about why you should care about clinical trials, a clinical trial had an impact on my life, but they've impacted all of us in ways that most people may never even stop to think about. Have you ever had a drug prescribed to you, or gone into the aisles of a pharmacy to pick up medication? Most people never stop to think of the long and winding path that each medicine took to get there. But if you've ever received medication this way, then you're directly benefiting from clinical trials. If you have high cholesterol, you can thank clinical trials for the daily statin that you take. If you have diabetes, you can thank clinical trials for your metformin. If you have aches and pains, you can thank clinical trials for drugs like aspirin and ibuprofen. It was through the clinical trial process that these drugs were first tested to make sure that they were safe and that they work in the way they're intended to. But clinical trials are just one step, the middle one actually, in the drug development process. The path to find and create new treatments for myelodysplastic syndromes involves hundreds, sometimes thousands of people, takes anywhere from 10 to 20 years, and requires hundreds of millions of dollars or more. And there are three key steps to this process: discovery, clinical trials, and review. Now, the discovery phase begins in a lab where scientists and researchers explore MDS and the human body to better understand: how does my MDS develop? How do patients with MDS not develop mature? Why do patients with MDS not develop mature blood cells? Why do current treatments stop working for MDS patients? And what are new ways to find, target, and treat patients with MDS? Based on their research, they'll test and evaluate experimental therapies to see how well they work against immature blood cells. Researchers need to show data that the drug is reasonably safe and that it has some benefit for patients with MDS. If the data supports this, the drug manufacturer will be issued what's called an Investigational New Drug Application. That's an IND. The drug manufacturer may then move forward with evaluating this experimental therapy in humans for the first time in a clinical trial. And clinical trials are the bulk of the conversation that we're going to have today. But in a general sense, a clinical trial allows researchers to answer specific questions about a disease, a medical device, a procedure, or an experimental treatment. It's a carefully controlled environment that allows us to take what we learn in the research and discovery phase and gather data to see how safe a new drug or therapy is and how well it may work in improving or treating a disease such as MDS. While an experimental drug is in the clinical trial setting, the only way to receive this drug is by joining and participating in a trial. There are some exceptions that we'll discuss or we can discuss later, but your doctor will not be able to prescribe and give you this drug until it has been approved. And once enough data has been collected that shows safety and effectiveness, or that it works, the sponsor of the study will submit this information to a government agency that oversees drug development. And in the United States, that's the job of the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA. The FDA will review all the information gathered throughout the clinical trial process and will decide whether to approve or deny the treatment. And once approved, the treatment can then be sold and marketed in the United States. Oftentimes, the FDA approval will require ongoing clinical trials to continue to gather data to confirm the approval, as well as potentially make it available to patients earlier in their disease. Now, how have clinical trials helped patients with MDS? Well, the earliest mention of MDS dates back to the year 1900, which you can see here. But it wasn't until 1976, which is 76 years later, when the first classification system for MDS would be published. And the modern term of myelodysplastic syndromes wasn't even adopted into use until 1982. That has all occurred within roughly the past 50 years. And if we look at the FDA approvals by decade, you'll see that in the 1970s, there were no drug approvals for MDS. In the 1980s, we started to see supportive care measures such as blood transfusions. And then it wasn't until the 1990s that we started to see allogeneic stem cell transplants and erythropoiesis stimulating agents, or ESAs, to help with MDS-related symptoms. In the 2000s, we saw 3 approvals with azacitidine, lenalidomide, and decitabine. In the 2010s, I have to wait for my to catch up. In the 2010s, we saw luspatercept. And in the 2020s, we've seen decitabine and cedazuridine, as well as ivosidenib. And the blue boxes are for therapies that treat the MDS, and the purple boxes are for therapies that treat MDS-related symptoms. And we'll talk about this in more detail. Remember that clinical trials are the only reason that these therapies were able to receive FDA approval for use in MDS. And what I think is interesting is to look at the number of clinical trials started per decade layered on top of these approvals. And in the 1970s, we see 1 trial and no drugs approved for MDS. In the 1980s, we saw 3 clinical trials started, and what we got was transfusion support. In the 1990s, this really jumps up into 112 clinical trials started, and 2 types of therapies were now being used in addition in MDS patients. And in the 2000s, 631 clinical trials were started, and 3 drugs were approved. In the 2010s, we saw 671 trials and 1 new drug. And in the 2020s so far, we're just a few years in, there's been 250 trials started so far and 2 drugs approved. At the end of the day, clinical trials are all about hope. But it's also important to talk about what clinical trials are not and some common myths and misconceptions. Clinical trials are not meant as an option of last resort. Clinical trials present a constantly shifting landscape. As soon as you receive treatment, there are trials that you will no longer be eligible for and ones that you may potentially be eligible for the first time. In fact, the National Comprehensive Cancer Network, or NCCN, is an organization that publishes a comprehensive set of guidelines detailing treatment decisions for 97% of all cancers, including MDS. And their guidelines state that the best management of any patient with cancer is in a clinical trial. Participation in clinical trials is especially encouraged. And to help put an even finer point on this, I want to share the number of trials in MDS and precursor conditions. These numbers are all from May of 2024 and are based on active trials in the US. And you can see here, ICUS, there's 2 trials. CCUS has 11 trials in the US. CHIP has 2 trials. And MDS has over 230 clinical trials. Clinical trials are not for guinea pigs. Now, this one doesn't come up very often anymore, but sometimes we'll occasionally hear it. I know my mom would often half joke about feeling like a pincushion the number of times they had to stick her for labs and whatever else they may be doing. But most often it's referencing the horrendous Tuskegee syphilis experiment of the 1930s. But I would encourage you all to think about joining a trial as being an active participant in research, not a guinea pig. I don't want to be a guinea pig either. I've taken part in 6 clinical trials. You are the boss, and you can decide if you want to join the trial or not. And if you want to stop participating in the trial at any point, you are the boss. Clinical trials are not full of placebos. Cancer clinical trials are not full of placebos. I just want to repeat that again. And even when they use placebos, they're still going to include treatment for the patient. It'd be unethical otherwise. Now, we recently reviewed MDS trials across the US, of which there are more than 230, and found that only 7 trials include a placebo. It's about 3%. But keep in mind, when a placebo is used, you will still be getting treatment. In many of these cases, researchers are exploring drugs such as azacitidine with or without additional therapy. A placebo in this case would be used so that a patient or doctor would not know if they're receiving the additional investigational therapy, but both groups of patients would still be receiving treatment for their MDS. And any trial that includes a placebo will make it clear to you, and you will have the option of discussing it with your doctor to see if joining and participating makes sense and is a good option for you. Clinical trials are not guaranteed to work, but neither is standard of care. And that's why we need clinical trials, to help improve upon the therapies that are currently approved and available today. Clinical trials are not always mentioned to patients. We addressed this point earlier on, but most patients are not presented with clinical trial options. It doesn't mean that there isn't one that may be an option for you. There's the old adage of the squeaky wheel getting the grease, and this is a great time to be a squeaky wheel and ask your doctor, ask your nurse, ask your care team, ask us, are there clinical trial options that you can consider? In fact, we just recently had a call from an MDS patient who called us because they kept asking their doctor about trial options, and their doctor advised them to call SparkCures and the MDS Foundation. Clinical trials are not always an option. The hard reality is that even when you're aware of trials and find one that you want, it might not be an option for you. You have to be eligible to join, and we're going to talk more about that later. Is the center near you? Is it open and accepting? Is there a treatment slot that's available for you when you need it? Are you willing and able to travel or relocate in order to join a trial if it's far away? These are things that we and your care team can help you with, but it's important to think about clinical trials as a frog on a lily pad. Now, I know that may seem like a strange statement, so bear with me. We once had a myeloma patient who we were helping, and one day said, I really feel like a frog on a lily pad. And I said, I have no idea what that means, but I'd love to hear the analogy. And he went on to explain that he thought of himself as a frog sitting on a lily pad, and eventually that lily pad would sink, meaning the treatment for his myeloma would stop working. In which case, he always wanted to have 2 or 3 or 4 other lily pads that he could jump to when needed. And it's such a wonderful analogy because we never know when treatment will stop working. We don't know what options may be available when that happens, but we can prepare and we can be aware of these options, because the worst time and the hardest time to go searching for a clinical trial is when you need one. Now, before we transition into the Clinical Trials 101 section of our presentation, I want to share my 3 main points with everyone. The first is clinical trials are the only reason that MDS therapies exist and are available to patients. The second one is clinical trials are the only path towards newer, better therapies, and one day we hope a cure for MDS. And the third is that clinical trials should be considered at every treatment decision point. Okay. Now, on to the main part of what clinical trials are and terms and concepts you're going to hear as you start to explore clinical trial options. At its most basic level, a clinical trial asks a question. And the type of question really depends on the type of trial. The first type of trial we're going to discuss is a treatment trial, and it's looking to ask questions such as, does a new treatment work? Does a new treatment work better than current treatments? Does it have less side effects? Does it treat your MDS or does it treat the symptoms of your MDS? And a great example of this is for patients who have anemia, where treatments like luspatercept or imetelstat are being evaluated. This is compared to trials with stem cell transplants or hypomethylating agents, HMAs, looking to treat the underlying MDS. And our system, which we'll go into more detail later, actually allows you to search for trials based on their purpose. And an observational trial is looking to collect data through questions and surveys or observing labs and scans over a period of time, and it's asking a question and watching. Some questions an observational trial may ask are, what are the long-term outcomes of people with MDS? What are the experiences and the needs of people diagnosed with MDS? And is MDS hereditary? Now, clinical trials are broken down into 3 phases. But as with most things medical, we tend to make it more confusing than it needs to be. So when looking for clinical trials, you may see them as Roman numerals. And for anybody that is thinking back to middle school, the I. But we're going to keep it simple. I'm going to refer to them as phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And the phase of a clinical trial is important because it will help you to better understand the type of question that is being asked. But the phase of a clinical trial should never be a reason for considering or not considering a trial. And I'll explain why that is. And before we get into each individual phase, I want to talk about the foundation of clinical trials, which is the safety of people who participate. That's why there are a number of groups and committees who oversee clinical trials to ensure safety is kept at the forefront. Some of these include internal review boards, IRBs, data and safety monitoring boards, or DSMBs, Office for Human Research Protections, OHRP, the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, as well as informed consent. Now, informed consent is not a group or committee. It's the document that should be people-friendly, that details everything about the trial, how it's run, what is expected of you as a patient who may participate, and what you can expect from the trial. It's the legal document that you'll sign before beginning evaluation or screening for a trial. And this document can be long, dozens and dozens of pages, so make sure to take your time in reading and understanding it. Take it home, read it with your family, ask questions, and don't ever feel pressured to make a decision by anyone running a trial. Take the time you need. Now, phase one. I'm going to discuss the phase of a trial as if it were a treatment trial. And in this case, phase one trials are used to ask the question, is this treatment safe and at what dose? And it usually consists of a small number of patients between 10 to 20 and a small number of centers, typically around 1 to 3. But not all phase one trials are created equal. There are different types of phase ones, including, is this a first in human or first in MDS? In other words, is this the first time that the treatment is being evaluated in human patients, or is it the first time in MDS? And what that means is the treatment might have been studied or approved in another cancer, and now researchers are looking to see if the treatment is effective in MDS. And this is important because researchers will at least have a better understanding of the potential side effects, the safety considerations if the treatment has been studied in humans before. The second thing to consider on a phase one trial is it in dose escalation or dose expansion. Now, dose escalation is a way of slowly test for safety and side effects in patients using typically what is called a 3+3 design. Researchers start by giving 3 patients the experimental therapy at its lowest dose, dose 1, right? And then they're going to wait and watch for a couple weeks or typically about a month to see if any side effects or any safety issues occur. If that doesn't, then they'll give 3 more patients a higher dose, which we'll call dose 2 here. And this process will continue to repeat. Research will increase or escalate the dose and watch for side effects until they hit a dose where they do occur, where these bad side effects occur. And once that happens, they'll then go back down a dose level before it. In our case here, it's dose level 4. And if they're seeing data that the treatment may be working, they can expand that dose and start giving it to a larger group of patients without going 3 by 3 by 3. This is dose escalation and then dose expansion. And it's important because if you're ever presented with a phase 1 trial, you can ask the doctor if it's in dose escalation or dose expansion. And if it isn't dose escalation, you can ask them what dose level they're currently at and out of how many. And you can also ask them how many patients have responded to the experimental treatment. Now, on to phase 2. Once the dose has been determined in phase 1, researchers will then take the treatment into phase 2, where they will continue to monitor for safety and side effects. But now they're looking at how well does this treatment work against someone's MDS. This typically involves a median number of patients between 20 to 100, but it could be more. A median number of centers, typically anywhere from 3 to maybe a dozen. And data from the phase 1 may be available at this point, which could help you to better understand if this trial may be an option for you. This is also the phase that is typically used to gather data for the approval review in front of the FDA that we had discussed earlier. And finally, phase 3. So moving from phase 1 to phase 2, researchers now have a better idea of how well the treatment works and understand more about the potential side effects and safety concerns of a treatment. And phase 3 will continue to look at side effects and safety. It is also typically asking the question, does this treatment work better than the current standard of care or treatments that have already been approved? This phase typically involves a large number of patients, could be more than 100, at a large number of centers, 10, 20, sometimes 50, or even more. And once a treatment is in phase 3, it should have data available from the earlier trials. But this is the phase where you're most likely to see randomization, which is where patients who are participating will be randomly assigned to one or more different treatment groups. And this is important because it helps researchers to more fairly compare how effective treatments are and can remove any potential bias. And if you're ever presented with a phase 3 trial that has randomization, this means that you could either get the experimental therapy or you could get the standard of care. And some trials that have randomization have a process called crossover. And what this means is if you're randomized into the standard of care and your disease starts to worsen, trials that allow for crossover may allow you to move over into the experimental therapy if certain conditions are met. Now, I've done a lot of talking about data and the gathering of data, but what data is being collected and how can you read it? So we're going to talk through some of these. The first one here is the letter N. And the letter N represents the number of patients who participated in the trial, and you'll typically see this as N equals 12 or N equals 114. The overall response rate, or ORR, is the number or percentage of patients who achieved a response in a treatment trial. Another one that could be used is red blood cell transfusion independence. and that's typically used in trials that are looking to treat MDS-related symptoms such as anemia, and is the number or percentage of patients who didn't require transfusion for a certain period of time. And the last one is overall survival, or OS, and it's the length of time after the start of treatment where a patient is still alive. And these are things that if you're looking coming out of some of the big seminars like ASH or ASCO, when you're looking at interim results or data results from trials, you're going to start to see some of these acronyms or some of these words, and this is what they mean. Now, some questions to keep in mind that you can ask your doctor or your care team if you're presented with a clinical trial. What is the phase of this trial? Are there any known or published results? What information can they share? And this is a nice one because even if data has not yet been published, you can ask a trial doctor how patients are doing on this trial to better help you decide if this may be an option for you. Are there any known side effects? And will participating in this trial make me ineligible for future trials? It's a really difficult question to answer, but it's an important question to ask. As I mentioned earlier, the clinical trial landscape for any one person is constantly changing. When you receive treatment, some trials will never be available to you again, and some may become available for the very first time. So you need to be the squeaky wheel and ask as many questions as you can. Now, where are trials available? Well, MDS clinical trials are available all across the U.S., as you can see here on this map. In fact, this map has not only the active MDS clinical trial centers, but the pins with the MDS Foundation logo are MDS Centers of Excellence. These are centers that are recognized by the MDS Foundation that has demonstrated a commitment to MDS research, and that includes specialized genetic testing, offering clinical trials, and participation in peer-reviewed MDS research. Later on, we're going to go through a demo, and we can show you how you can search for trials that are being run at a center of excellence. But it's also worth noting here as you look at this map that not every single clinical trial that is offered is available at each of these locations. Some centers may have 1 or 2 MDS trials, and some, like MD Anderson in Houston, Texas, have more than 70 running right now. And if we look at academic and community and these types of medical centers, we recently did a review of every clinical trial and every center that offers one. And we found that, unfortunately, not surprisingly, that the majority, or 75% of centers that offer MDS clinical trials are at large academic medical centers. These are the Dana-Farbers and the MD Andersons and the Memorial Sloan Ketterings of the world. Only about 25% are community medical centers. And what this means, and again, it's an unfortunate thing, is that the path to an MDS clinical trial still largely runs through large academic centers and through an MDS specialist. So it's our recommendation that whenever possible, meaning both financially and logistically, patients with MDS should try to establish a relationship with an MDS specialist at the closest academic research center that is near them or near families and friends. Now, some questions as we're discussing clinical trials with your doctor. The following are some things that maybe help you get started. Can you talk to me about clinical trials? Are there clinical trials being run at this center? When should I consider a clinical trial? And can you make a referral to a nearby center that has active clinical trials? And if your doctor is unwilling or unable to have this conversation, you can connect with our team or the MDS Foundation to help explore nearby MDS doctors and centers that you can explore. What's the cost? This is always a tough topic to cover because the unfortunate answer is that it all depends. It depends on your insurance. It depends on the trial. It depends on how far you may have to travel and how often. But there's always going to be a cost. Travel, impact to quality of life, insurance payments, deductibles. But typically, study drugs will be provided as well as labs and tests that are done for the trial. But anything outside of that can and may be billed to your insurance. As I mentioned before, be the squeaky wheel. Ask the trial team what it will cost. Ask the hospital to speak with a financial resource team. Ask the sponsor if there are any financial assistance. Ask everyone you can. And there was a study that was done in multiple myeloma that I wanted to share regarding the financial impact of cancer care. And it was done at the Mayo Clinic by Dr. Saji Kumar, who's one of our medical advisors. The study reviewed the quality of life, perception of care, and financial burden of patients with multiple myeloma who were treated during clinical trials. And if we have a callback to our trial results, the N there was 35, so 35 patients that were in a clinical trial, And comparing them with patients who were treated in standard of care, in the end there was 88, so 35 and 88 patients collectively. At the start of the trial, 16% of patients in the clinical trial group reported a financial burden, and 19% of patients in the standard of care group, pretty similar. But it became even more interesting at the 1-year mark, where 33% of those in the clinical trial group reported financial burden compared to nearly half of the people in the standard of care group. Now, I want to be very clear. I am not saying that you should join a clinical trial to save money. This study showed that no matter what you do, standard of care or clinical trial, there is a cost that has to be considered and dealt with. Now, how can SparkCures help? There are hundreds and hundreds of MDS clinical trials running around the US, and it can be both overwhelming and confusing, like trying to find a needle in a haystack. But here's the reality. There's no right or wrong way to go about looking for clinical trials. Some people will jump right in, others will never join, and some people may change their mind over time. There's no right or wrong. This whole conversation is around helping you to better understand your options so that you can make a decision that works for you and your family. And SparkCures and the MDS are here to help you navigate these questions. We have clinical trial navigators. Try to get this up here. Okay, great. We have clinical trial navigators that you can call and speak with to learn more about your options. In fact, Mel from our team will be walking you through a demo of our system in just a bit. And there's no pressure. We've been doing this for over 9 years now, and we have people that are on their 5th or 6th clinical trial, and people that we've been connected with for years who have never ended up going on to a clinical trial. Everyone's journey is unique, and we want to help support you on yours. We also have a clinical trial and center finder that is available through the MDS Foundation's website, and a quick link to get there is sparkcures.com/MDS, and we'll have that in the chat as well. Am I eligible? Every clinical trial has what is called inclusion and exclusion criteria. This is really just a fancy way of saying that there are reasons why you may be able to join a clinical trial and reasons why you may not be able to join one. And this is an actual page from clinicaltrials.gov, which is the government website that lists information on clinical trials around the US. But it can be difficult to navigate and understand this. You know, are you actually eligible for this trial? Is this information up to date and accurate? So what we do at SparkCures is on our portal, you can browse these trials anonymously. You can answer questions to help narrow down your results, or, you know, preferably you can create a profile. And what that allows you to do is really personalize your results. We try to limit our questions to only things that will help us determine which trials may be a proper fit for you. And even if you're unsure, you can leave answers blank. Our system is very forgiving in that way, that will show you clinical trial criteria that requires additional information. And we can either help you through our phone support, or you can take that to your doctor to understand a little bit more. And, you know, what we're able to do through this is once you personalize your profile, we use all that information, including your diagnosis, your treatment history, labs, and disease information. We then evaluate your profile against every active MDS clinical trial across the US. And our system is then able to review your preferences, such as location, how far you're willing to travel, and other special filters that we have for patients. And we return a personalized list of all clinical trials back to you. And the way that most people, including doctors, talk about clinical trials is in very black and white terms. You're either eligible or not eligible. But there's an option in between, which is you may be eligible to participate in the future when something changes, like your disease or labs. So we take these personalized lists of trials and we further break it down into buckets for you. This allows us to show you trials that you may currently be eligible for, trials that you're not eligible for but could be in the future, as well as trials that you are no longer eligible for. And I can see here I changed some of these before this, so it's going a little bit out of order, so I'm going to put them all in there, that you're no longer eligible for. Now, this favorite trials and not interested, this is something that actually works on our myeloma side, and we're going to be rolling this out a little bit later this year, but it really allows you to personalize this. If there's a trial that you're interested in that isn't yet accepting patients, you can favorite it. And what we'll do is once that trial opens up, we'll alert you in real time, letting you know. You can also say you're not interested in trials. So this really gives you the ability to further personalize a list of clinical trials specifically to you. And with this information, you can remember what it looked like on the clinicaltrials.gov. We're able to help you see the trial criteria and spell out exactly what you match for, what things you pass, what things you're not yet eligible for. And we're also, again, really, really conservative. So if there's something that we aren't sure about, or we feel like needs to come to the doctor's attention, we flag it as doctor review. And we do this for treatment history, labs, diagnosis information, and more. Now, for some questions related to inclusion exclusion criteria, if you were ever told that you're not eligible for a trial, ask why. Does something have to change before you would be eligible? Treatments, labs, and if a doctor recommends against a trial, ask why. Is it lack of results? Is it side effects? And what you can do is you can actually take that information and bring it back to our team at SparkCures of the MDS Foundation, and we can use that to really try to change our search or adapt based on your doctor's recommendations. And I always like to end on these last two slides. We are a team of real people, and we're here to really help you navigate your clinical trial options. The number on the screen that's going to come up here is our call line. We'd love to hear from you, 888-803-1766. We don't limit our call times, and we typically set up a regular time frame for us to call and check in with you, which could be monthly, it could be every few months, it could be once a year. Oftentimes when people are doing well, it turns into how are the grandkids, how was vacation? But it's a way to really stay connected so you don't have to think about clinical trials. We're going to be very proactive in checking in and having that conversation. And we want you to know that alongside the MDS Foundation, we're here to help in any way that we can. And you can use the link on this page to go directly to the MDS Foundation's clinical trial finder tool. And before I turn it over to Mel from our team, who also happens to be my wife and who is also a registered nurse and a cancer care partner, she's going to walk through a demo. But I want to thank you for allowing us to come in and to be part of your MDS community. We all stand on the shoulders of giants. People today are living longer, better lives because of those who came before them and participate in trials. And if you're curious about our name, SparkCures, or our hummingbird logo, this quote is actually from Dante's Inferno. A mighty flame follow with a tiny spark. And our mighty flame is a cure for MDS. And our job is to create as many sparks as we can to help us get there. And in Native American culture, the hummingbird is actually considered a powerful symbol of strength, endurance, and resilience. Three things that all MDS patients need. They're also viewed as healers of the sick, and during migration, hummingbirds can travel for hundreds of miles, much like patients may need to for trials. So we thought it was a fitting name and a fitting symbol for all that we're fighting for. So thank you all so much. I'm looking forward to hearing from you all soon and going through some of the questions here. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Brian. My name is Mel, and I'm an RN who works on the patient support team at SparkCures. What I'd like to do today is take you through a brief overview of our MDS portal and show you how you can use it to find potentially eligible clinical trial options. So before we get started, in general, there are a couple different ways to find clinical trials. You can use the government maintained site, which is clinicaltrials.gov. You could use facility or center specific websites if they're available. So sometimes, say you're a Dana-Farber or a UCSF patient, sometimes they'll have their own listing on their websites of the trials being run at their center, sometimes not. And then you can always, of course, ask your doctor. Some of the challenges we find with other resources are that they can have outdated information or may even have some trials missing. And we know how hard that is as a patient, right? To be sent on a wild goose chase, kind of looking for information on a study and to have it turn out that that study is not even enrolling patients. So to combat this, we use a few different strategies in our portal to try to make searching as easy as possible. First, we work with the sponsors or the collaborators on the study directly whenever we can to make sure that we have the most up-to-date information on that study. Second, we laser focus on the indication. So whether it's filtering or questions that we ask, and so in this case, MDS, to provide filtering that's really relevant to MDS patients and where you are in your MDS journey. And that helps us narrow down trials based on, where exactly you are and what might be relevant for you. So before we get started with searching, I'd like to show you a couple things in our portal and then we can dive in. So starting with, this is our SparkCures MDS Foundation clinical trial portal. And I want to show you a few things that I think are really important. So let's say you get here, you forget everything I've said, you forget everything Brian has said, and you go, what do I do now? So I want to show you the best ways to get in touch with us. So this blue circle will follow every single page that you're navigating on our portal, and it's our chat widget. So you can just go ahead and click that, and that's going to open up our chat widget bubble for you. And during, regular business hours for us, will get this chat directly and can kind of respond with you and chat with you while you're navigating the site. If it's after hours, you can type your question in, leave it for us, and I promise we'll get back to you. Sometimes it's a little dicey if we're on the phone with patients, but we're here to help in any way that we can. So that's one way you can get in touch with us. And then scrolling all the way down to the bottom here. Here's our phone number, the 888-803-1766. It's our MDS phone line. And then this option here, the schedule a time for us to call you, this puts you right into our calendar. So you can set up a time, whether it's 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever it may be, for us to give you a call and answer any questions that you have or run through some searching with you. Chat with us now. This will open up that widget. And we also have the contact information for the MDS Foundation here as well. Okay, so I'm going to scroll back up to the top, and you'll see on this right-hand side at the top, you'll see create an account. And we'll talk about that more in a couple minutes and why we think that's kind of the best way to use our site. But I want you to know where to find that. And you'll see on the left, it says centers and trials here. So there's a couple different ways that you can approach searching our database. And you can do all of this, like I said, without creating an account. So what I'm going to do is, rather than searching by centers based, I'm going to search through our master trial listing, which you can find here. So I'm going to go ahead and select trials. And that's going to open up our master trial list. So as of right now, you can see it's like 232 trials here. That's totally overwhelming to try to navigate on your own. So we're going to try to use some of our filtering and narrow that down a little bit and see where that takes us. Okay, so let me just open this a little more here. Okay, perfect. All right. So I'm from Massachusetts. So we're going to go ahead and narrow down our location. We're going to enter in Boston. And we're going to save that. And then I'm going to say within 60 miles of Boston. And let's scroll down and see what that does for us. Okay, so that takes us down to 45 trials right there, which is great. All right, and then we're going to take a look at some of the MDS specific filters that I mentioned a couple minutes ago. So I'm going to go over here to the snap bar and click Show All Filters. And so in here, you'll see you can adjust your distance if you'd like to. Diagnoses, this is where you'll see if you're looking for CHIP or CCAS or ICAS trials, you can find that here, changing your diagnosis. Purpose of trials, so this is kind of interesting. So we separate our trials out by basically what question is the trial trying to answer? What is this trial trying to accomplish? So I'm going to look for trials that are treating the underlying MDS. Other options, right? Trials to treat the symptoms. So sometimes the anemia, the fatigue of MDS. There's observational patient support, transplant support trials, and imaging labs and tests are all the ways we categorize them. But for our purposes today, we're going to look at trials to treat MDS. So I'm going to select that, and I'm going to go see results just to see what that does to our number. See, that brings us down to 34. Okay. And let's take it down a little bit more. Let's go back to that filter. And let's say my MDS specialist said to me that they think I should be looking for therapies involving hypomethylating agents, so HMAs, as my next line of therapy. So I'm going to go ahead and select HMAs, and we're going to see the results in that one. Let's see, where did that put me? Okay, so that takes us down to 12. So we're in pretty good shape. 12 trials is still quite a bit to navigate through and kind of read all the details, but let's dive into a trial and see what's what here. All right, so I'm going to select this second trial down. Let's decide to be in cedazuridine as maintenance therapy. Let's open this up. Okay, so this is our trial detail page, and it's basically just a broad overview of everything that we know about this study. So see overview here, kind of consolidates all the information that we have. We have the description. So on this page, you can see the enrollment. You can see the sponsors and collaborators on this study. You'll also see the NCT identifier, and this is also a link out that can take you to the ct.gov page. Locations. So this is open and enrolling at Mass Gen. That's the study site that's within the travel distance that I've set. And under the resources tab here, if there were any published results available for this study or patient-friendly information that the sponsor or collaborators may have designed for patients specific for this, they'd be available here. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and click on eligibility. And here's where we can really see the power in creating an account to help narrow down this even more. So I'm going to open up this tab here that says criteria. And you see all these different points. So every trial has inclusion and exclusion criteria, which are reasons that you may be allowed to join or things that might keep you from being able to join a study. If you create an account, you can enter in to further narrow down your results. You can enter in your MDS subtype, your risk level, your treatment history, and your most recent lab values. And by doing this, our system will then evaluate your information against every single trial and these criteria points in our database every 24 hours so that you always know what trials you might be eligible for. And a good example of this, let's say I had created an account and I had said, you know what, I've already received an allogeneic stem cell transplant. This trial wouldn't appear for me because, as you can see here, it says patients with prior treatment with an allogeneic stem cell transplant are not eligible. So from this trial detail page at any point, even if you go back to the overview, you see this button over here that says, am I eligible? This can also take you to the screen to be able to create an account. So we're going to go ahead and click this because I want to briefly kind of scan through the questions that we ask ultimately so you have an idea of what information you would need to create an account. So here's your MDS risk level. There's your classification. Do you have primary or secondary MDS? Here are your treatment history questions. We ask specifically about HMAs and transplants. And then these are the specific lab values that we ask for that we find that most often are seen in inclusion and exclusion criteria. So I know we didn't have a whole lot of time. Overall, I just wanted to give you a brief introduction of our site and how you can use it to search. I think the most important takeaway that I have for you is that in everything we do, we really take a patient's first approach, which means that we want to be able to empower you to be able to find the information that you're looking for and be able to have an informed conversation with your doctor, whether you decide to join a study or not. We're glad to know you, and we want to help in any way that we can. We're real people, and we're here. And any questions that you have, I know this process is really overwhelming and intimidating, and we know it, unfortunately, because we've done it with loved ones. But we're here. So I just so appreciate you taking the time today, and we hope to connect with you really soon. Thank you.
Hey, thank you guys so much. So this is Ashley. I'm the Director of Patient Care. I was introduced by Janice a little bit ago. It's really nice to see some of the names on the attendee list that I talk to often, so thanks for coming. Just a real quick shout out. We did have a new FDA approval in the MDS space on the 6th, so this is why we do what we do, and that's why trials are so important. So we'll get started with some questions. So the first one that we had, do you see any clinical trials specifically targeting the P53 genes in MDS? It's kind of a hot topic right now.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. Hey, everybody. Brian here. Thanks for having us today. It's great to be here with you, even though we're not seeing everybody. And I'm actually out sort of in nowhere, Pennsylvania right now. We volunteer at a cancer camp, and this is our 30th year, if you can see from my shirt. So hopefully my internet is holding up, and I'm just glad I'm able to be here. And Mel, thanks for being here as well. While these questions were coming in, Ashley, we were pulling it up on the system. And it looks like there's about 20 trials that include something related to P53 in their inclusion and exclusion. Now, most of those are really related to risk level or establishing risk level. We did find a couple that specifically exclude against P53 and ones that allow for or require P53 or JAK2 mutations, things of that nature. The cytogenetics is really important. But in terms of the impact of trial matching, it's still, on the smaller end of matching criteria. And Mel, if you want to chime in or add anything, I think the individual that asked that, I'm trying to find it, actually that might have gone away. But if you want to give us a call, we can actually pull up those 20 trials and work through those based on your account and see if there is something on the P53 side that may make sense. But a really great question.
Right. Great. So the next one is I need a clinical trial for CMML after decitabine stops working. I am currently on a microdose of decitabine protocol and my platelets are trending down. Other counts are stable. So the question here is, does SparkCures trials, do they include CMML?
Yeah. Mel, do you want to take that or do you want me to?
Why don't you take that one?
Yeah, happy to. So it's really a great question. And when we look at MPNs or myeloproliferative neoplasms, right now we work on the multiple myeloma side and the MDS side. But we actually are also working with centers. So for instance, Memorial Sloan Kettering outside of in New York City, we do all their heme clinical trial matching. So we do have some MPN and CMML trials in our system. The challenge, I think, to the person that asked that question, I'm sorry, I keep looking to see if I can see their name to address them, is that it's not an exhaustive list. When we do an MDS search or a myeloma search, we're searching every single trial across the entire US. So what I would say is we understand the situation that you're in, and I would encourage you to give us a call. We can still do a search and we can see if we can find something both within our system that we're already covering, potentially on the CMML side, or we can look through and put some stuff together through private or public resources and see if we can come back with some options to put on the table there.
Great. The next one
Debbie.
is, yeah. Let me go back up.
Kathy.
Yes. So recently found out that clinical trials are not free and that the patient may end up with a huge bill, including the initial consultation with the investigator who may or may not tell you that you are qualified. Why are we left with a bill when we are volunteering our time and most importantly, our health?
I'll take that.
Yeah.
It's a really, really good question. And it really can depend on the trial. So in general terms, typically what the sponsor of the trial will cover are things that are specific to that drug, or things that are above and beyond what we call standard of care. So what your insurance company says you would kind of be receiving anyway with this diagnosis from your home center or from your home physician. Typically the trial will be routed through your insurance, and anything else above and beyond, any other additional imaging, testing, biopsies, and the cost of receiving the medication itself. If there's hospitalization associated with receiving that would also be covered, but it's really tricky. And I think this is a question that we get a lot, and it's kind of a quagmire. And sometimes I think that, physicians just assume that patients know that. So I think it's important, especially if you're traveling to a center of excellence or somewhere else, to check in with your insurance and say, hey, listen, I'm looking at joining a trial here. What does this look like? And to check, it doesn't hurt to touch base with whatever trial team your appointment scheduled with beforehand to say, what does this look like? Is this visit going to be routed through my insurance? And just to really know what that coverage is going to look like. Some companies are different in terms of reimbursements and travel assistances and things like that. But it is for sure a topic that is not covered in depth enough for patients. And that's a question we get really often. So I think my best answer is you just have to check with your insurance, because oftentimes they don't know. And it really is kind of putting all those puzzle pieces together to figure out what you're going to be responsible for.
Thanks, Mel. And actually, I'm curious if you have a take on this as well, because, Kathy, you can see from our that slide in there, there's going to be a cost, whether it's standard of care or clinical trials.
Mhm.
And we've seen both sides of this where people go in and the large majority or virtually everything is covered and some things go to their insurance, on the standard of care side. We did have a situation probably about 6 months ago. This is on the multiple myeloma side, where a patient was going into a clinical trial, and 2 days before they were set to start, they got a call from the trial team saying that one of the drugs was not going to be covered by insurance, and they were being covered by the trial sponsor, and it was going to go through their insurance, and they were going to have a $3,000 a month payment for this drug. This patient ended up deciding not to go on the trial for that specific reason. And sometimes, hopefully we find those earlier, when we have those conversations and we ask those questions, hopefully we're not finding it 2 days before you're set to start a trial. But Ashley, I'm curious, given your role, for a long time on the trial side, anything you want to add onto that?
Yes, I can pop on just really quickly. So, what I will say is that when they do screening, so at the time you are identified for a trial and it's first mentioned, they should send a message to your insurance company. What they request in that message is, will insurance cover what is considered a standard of care while on the clinical trial? So I've always described it as a partnership. So anything that doesn't, like they said, fall into clinical trial goes to insurance, and then everything else goes to the trial. Every place that you go to for a clinical trial has a billing grid. They can pull that out. They can tell you exactly what procedures are being billed to trial and which ones are going to be billed to your insurance. So if you have questions specifically about which ones, they should be able to tell you that. And the approval should be collected prior to screening, if at all possible, unless it's an urgent case. So if you have very high risk disease and the time limit is short, that's when I've seen them come back and say, hey, sorry, like we just got this back before starting drug. But the very vast majority of the time that should be sent prior to screening when you're first identified. So hopefully that doesn't become an issue, but they should be able to also break that down for you and kind of tell you, what's, so it kind of depends too on how out of the box your trial is, right? If it is involving a standard of care drug, then you do get billed for that standard of care drug. If it's 100% experimental, then 100% of the drug goes to the trial. So it also depends on what other treatments are in there.
And I think that's great, Ashley. And I knew you'd be able to add some more. I think the thing we have to remember is there was a lot of shoulds in there, right? Which is why we have to
Good.
ask a lot of questions and be the squeaky wheel on top of this. So even though things should be happening, on your behalf, and they should be working towards that, especially if that's a big consideration point, ask a lot of questions and continue to ask questions. You just have to be a really good advocate for yourself, is I think the resounding response across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. Billing is hard, very hard. Okay, so to move to the next one, a question here, is it possible for NCI centers to coordinate on a trial that is sponsored only at one? So the example is, if MD Anderson has a trial for adding a study drug to the conditioning regimen pre-allo, could another center access the drug through them and deliver as part of conditioning, then complete the transplant remotely following MD Anderson protocols, report the data to them? So can you essentially get a clinical trial drug at a non-clinical trial site, but still be part of that trial? So does that happen?
Yeah, I guess the way I would answer that is the most likely answer here is going to be no to this. But what I would say, there are centers that will have protocol sharing in place. There are ways like we're in the Pittsburgh area, and Johns Hopkins and Allegheny Health Network AHN do have a protocol sharing, so they are able to share IRB approvals and reviews and have access to those protocols. So it's kind of a tricky question. I would say for the most part, you're going to get access to the trial where it is being run, but there are sort of some of those edge cases. I don't know if the NCI designation itself, from my experience, and actually correct me if you have a different experience on this, would be that doesn't really matter. It depends on, MD Anderson does that with a number of centers too, where they might have access, or Sarah Cannon, which is based out of Nashville, Tennessee. There are ways that they can share protocols and access to some of those, but it's not something that we commonly see happening, where you're going to go somewhere, be evaluated for a trial, and then return home to get that trial at your local center through some sort of protocol sharing. It just really doesn't happen. It is wonderful and it's ideal as that situation would be. It really doesn't exist. But Ashley and Mel, if you guys have something you want to add on top of that from an experience side.
Yeah. The one thing I can say is, if it is a standard of care drug, so say you have 5 days in a row, and for the day one, you have an experimental drug plus a standard of care drug, you have to be at the trial center for that day. However, if the other 4 days are being paid for by your insurance anyway, then there's a chance to go closer to home for those. And so that's very center dependent on how they've worked out budgeting. But to get like the standard of care components closer to home is sometimes possible, especially post-COVID, trying to avoid travel. But that again is center dependent, but not the actual study drug itself.
Ashley, how often have you seen that, where on the standard of care side, something, part of it would occur at the trial site and then part of it would occur locally? Just anecdotally, like, is there like a percentage of the
Right.
time is that a pretty is that like an outlier case, or is that something that you are seeing at least some semblance of occurrence, or did see some semblance of happening, at your time and on the trial coordinator side?
Yeah, so I think that it depends on the center and how big their catchment area is. And so essentially if they cover a wide
Hmm.
variety, like a wide range of places, we try to put them back into their hometown when they can, but it's usually after the first couple of cycles, right? We want to get like 3 cycles in. We want to feel comfortable with where you are with your side effects. We also want to trust that center. And so it has to be one that we have a good relationship with, and feel comfortable. And it also depends on how often. So every trial has adverse event assessment. So basically, someone's going to ask you, what are your symptoms? And can we relate that to the drug? So it depends on those time point. Some do not require them throughout the whole treatment cycle, right? And so then those visits can be delegated to somewhere else. But
And
I
and
think they do try to make an effort.
and that's only for the standard of care aspect of that, right? From what you're saying. Um,
Correct.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay. So moving on, that's a great question, and I wish we could do better.
Hmm.
Diagnosed with low risk MDS in 2020, currently watch and wait, quarterly CBCs to monitor blood levels and pancytopenia. IPSS score, 1.29, deletion 20Q. How do I determine continued watch and wait versus a clinical trial? Basically also with quality of life concerns. So how do you make that determination?
I think
Oh,
it's a good question. And I
it's
think
a
that
great question.
going to be different for every patient, and it might be different from month to month depending on how you're feeling and what what you have going on personally and traveling and all those things that kind of come with clinical trial participation. So I think that's a really great question, and I think it's something that nearly every patient that we talk to wrestles with. I mean, clinical trial participation, depending on the trial, can mean a lot of visits. It can mean a lot of testing. It can, I mean, they can be a commitment, for sure, to participate in. So it really is an individual, decision in terms of evaluating. But I think the fact that you're thinking about those things, and kind of processing what's important and what, goals you have alongside being a cancer patient and all those things, it puts you, you're ahead of the game already. It's really making the best decision for you and for your lifestyle and for your family, at any given moment.
And I think what I build off of what Mel's saying there, I think the role that we play in this, is that we can come back and we can help you understand what trials might be an option, given everything that you're sharing here. What are the trials that may be an option that you can then go back? But this is the importance of having a specialist, seeing somebody that is an MDS specialist to help you navigate, that can understand both your disease and your wants and your needs, and help you to understand how do you make a decision, because everybody's going to make these decisions, Philip, very differently, right? Under different situations and different scenarios and different needs and different wants. So there's no right or wrong answer to this. What I would say is, if you're already asking that question, let's have a call. We can talk through. We can give you that, and then you can go back and have that conversation with your doctor. And we do this a lot, both on the MDS and the myeloma side, where doctors will say, you know what, I see these trials, but I still like the watch and wait. But they'll say a lot of times it's your decision, right? I am on board with watch and wait. And when these numbers get to a certain point, or when we start to see an upward trend, then we know what we can jump to. Or they might say, listen, you're at a place where I think it might be an option, that we're seeing some results coming out that are encouraging. And it might make sense to actually look at participating or starting treatment. So, but that's really that clinician conversation, and that call on that side, which I think is a really important one.
And I think something I want to throw in there that I don't know if we've explicitly said is that, for you to call us, use our site, create an account, it is 100% free for patients, and it always has been, and it always will be. So, I mean, regardless of how much time we spend on the phone, you want to email us every day with a question, we are 100% patients first, and we never, never, never charge patients to be able to, to use us as a resource.
That's a great point. Great resource too. Um, okay, the next one is, I live in British Columbia, Canada. How do I access a clinical trial? And if travel or relocation is involved, where are the typical locations?
And I think for hi Virginia, I think she came back a little bit further down and said, I think you answered my question. You can see the map. So the nice thing is on the MDSF portal, when you go there, you can click on centers. And again, if you have an account, we will really, personalize those results to you, but you don't have to have an account. You can just go and see where is every MDS trial being run. Unfortunately, Virginia, we are US based right now. There is conversations about moving into Canada. I will say, I know on at least on the multiple myeloma side, I think we're about 70% of the trials that are running in the US are also running in Canada. So we have a pretty good coverage. I think that number is pretty similar on the MDS side. So whether you're looking to, come to the States, depending on your insurance too, if you have private insurance as a Canadian citizen. But you can see there, all along, our border, there are major centers that have clinical trials that we could be exploring, and we're happy to sort of open that up and look at some of the Canadian ones. Even if we're not doing that across the entire board, we can still look through and try to understand that Canadian landscape for you, to put some options. But I can tell you from some of the stuff we've done, most of it's going to revolve around Princess Margaret, although there are other centers, but that's where the bulk of trials are running, from a hematology standpoint.
Yeah. I will say really quickly, a lot of our centers of excellence have international patient programs. So they help you get together all those pieces that you need to be able to travel should you need to into the States for a trial. Right. So our next question is, what are the usual criteria for transfusion independence? Is it based on a certain level of hemoglobin or on patient-reported symptoms such as fatigue and shortness of breath?
Yeah, Mel, do you want to take that one? I had pulled some trials up, so I can throw some things in as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question. I think sometimes they're a little tricky to answer because it really depends. And I kind of hate giving that answer, and I wish there was a better one. Maybe Ashley, if you have a thought too. But I think it really depends on, let's say your, hemoglobin is sitting on the low side, right? If you tolerate it well, they might, you and your doctor might kind of view that in a different way versus someone who's really profoundly symptomatic. So I guess my best answer is it really depends on the specific situation and the, conversations you and your doctor have had, and how you're feeling and what your quality of life is like.
And some of them will be based on having had or not had prior treatment, having had or not had prior ESAs. You'd ask specifically, I think, about hemoglobin. One of the ones here, and it's nice on the portal side. If you click on trials, it'll say the purpose of the trial, and you can click on there and say trials looking to treat the symptoms of MDS. And I think as of earlier this week, I think there's only about 12 of them, so it's not a whole lot to go through, and we can help you on that. But you can look without adding anything else, and you can look at those 12 and see some of them require hemoglobin less than 10. Some will be symptomatic where fatigue and some of those things are there. So each one of them is going to be a little bit different, but that's part of the inclusion exclusion criteria that we can help you navigate to see if there are some options that make sense.
Yeah, I can give just a little bit of heads up on the drug that was just approved. So a lot of them look for a hemoglobin rise of 1.5, so that number. And then the transfusion cutoff, like they said, is very symptom dependent. So in some centers it's 7, in some it's 8. If you have cardiac conditions, it's going to be a higher number. So those are individualized, but the hemoglobin rise they looked for was about 1.5 on the most recent approvals. Right. And then what are steps into getting accepted into a trial?
Yeah, I think so, Kathy. A lot of great questions going in there. I think that really what we need to do when you're looking at a trial is getting connected at the center where it's being run. We're looking at sort of a high level view of could you be eligible, because they're not going to put you through screening if they're able to tell you very quickly and very easily that you wouldn't be eligible. But that's really where that informed consent process comes in, where they're going to walk through and explain everything about the clinical trial as it exists. And you're going to have a chance to take that document home, review it, discuss it with your family. And once you sign that, that's when they can start going through, taking the labs that they need to do, in order to see if you qualify at a high level. And there's what's called, I know the matrix that Ashley had spoken about before. There's actually, there's a table, there's a chart of events that will exist that will explain everything. You'll come in for each of these visits. The informed consent document will explain everything that is part of this. What happens this first day when you come in? What happens the next day when you come in? What happens the next day? That might be a little cart horse, right? Because I think it's really where do you get started? And you get started with whatever center is actually running that trial, because you're not going to be able to join a clinical trial without being seen at a center that is actually participating in there and having a conversation with the coordinator and the trial team that's actually running it.
Um, all right, so the next one is there somewhere on your site that provides a list of places we can apply for financial assistance, transportation assistance, etc.? If not, can you put it up? It would be so helpful.
I mean, it's a great point. And Kathy, I'm wondering, I don't know if you're able to type in there, is this just overarching treatment assistant, or is this, I'm going to take this question as related to a financial assistance on a trial basis. And Ashley, I know you have a list of resources. If you want to chime in here, one of the ones that's most widely known to us is the MDS Foundation. And I can put that in the chat, where once you're accepted into a clinical trial, you can actually go in there for financial assistance based on financial details. They go off of, I think, up to 7 times the poverty limit based on family size and things in order to put financial assistance forward. But Ashley, if there's specific ones, that you want to name here, I think the other thing to add to that, Kathy, is asking. So every clinical trial has the ability to provide financial assistance. And oftentimes they do it on a center by center basis. So it's typically not blanket. They will then go through and they will negotiate with each individual center or hospital that is participating. So oftentimes if you raise your hand and say, I'm interested, but I need some help, that can trigger a conversation with the trial team to go back to the sponsor if they haven't negotiated those rates, or saying we have somebody that needs some help. Sometimes it comes back to that squeaky wheel side of things. But Ashley, anything you can share on top of that?
Yeah, the Lazarus, like that's what I was going to say. They're phenomenal. I just met them recently. They do a great job. For general MDS, not trial related, we do have a guide to assistance program that we can share that lists every place we know of that provides like copay assistance or travel assistance. But that's not trial specific. So you did a great job, Brian, with that wonderful answer.
If I do, is there a way for me to send? I was going to put the link there. Is there a way?
Yeah,
Oh,
you should have
Janice,
a chat.
if you're able to, it says hosts and panelists. Let's see.
If you
I
change
don't mean
it to
to tie us up.
no, you're fine. You can change it to everyone, I think.
Here, I
No,
don't see
you
an all, but maybe someone can help because I don't have that ability. But that's the link
okay.
if we want to get that out so everyone can see
Yeah.
that.
Okay, they got it. They put it in.
Great, thank you.
Right. So our next one, it's a great question. What happens when the trial is over? Can you still take the medication or treatment that was successful?
It's a really, really good
Yeah,
question. I'll
go ahead,
jump
Mel.
in. So it really depends on the study. But Brian was talking about the informed consent document a couple minutes ago, and that will be lined out in the informed consent. And so oftentimes it'll say, patient may continue to receive experimental treatment as long as their disease is responding and they don't experience certain side effects. So that's a great, great question. Sometimes it is a limited duration. I'll say the majority of, trials that we talk about and protocols that we see will have something in there that says you can continue to receive treatment as long as you're responding. I think it's the outlier that we see that says, you only receive it for this, and then once the trial is over, see you later. It's not typically what we see.
And sometimes it's difficult. So we're coming from the world of multiple myeloma and into the MDS side, and we've seen quite a number of drug approvals. So this really comes up quite often on the myeloma side, and we sometimes the protocol or the informed consent will say, that conversations will be had, especially as they're getting into that phase 2, phase 3, where they're going in front of the FDA for approval. Most often we see some sort of bridge gap where they will continue to provide that and then try to transition the patients either to the compassionate use or transition them over to the standard of care. side of things. So it's a great question on that side, but it really all depends. It's a lot of what you're going to hear from us. We don't mean to kick the can, but it's there's no clear direct answer all the time. But we'll do our best if there's a specific trial to try to help get that question answered.
Yeah. And I can say from like my experience, I don't see them like Mel said, say, sorry, we're done, right? You did your part, but they try to help people stay on what works. Great. Another great question. Is there an age limit to these trials?
There
that's
is. Yeah, go ahead, Mel. I pulled up the number. I was going to share that, but go ahead.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So it does. I just pulled it up on our system. Virtually every trial is going to have that. Most often, we're going to see greater than or equal to 18 years of age, but there are ranges where you can't be older than 39 or 60 or 75, or there are upper and lower limits. And that's one of the things that our system will evaluate and let you know if you're no longer eligible because of that.
Our next one is, what's the historical experience with Medicare covering clinical trials?
So I pulled up some information here. Mel, do you have anything you wanted to chime in first?
No, you go ahead.
I do have a CMS coverage. I have the document here that talks about the coverages, and this is all the way back from September of 2000 that these went into effect, covering the routine costs of qualifying clinical trials. Ashley, is that a document or part of the resource package that the MDS Foundation has, or I could share this
No,
CMS
but we
sheet
should.
as well?
We should.
Great. Here, I'm going to put the
Happy to.
CMS document there. I don't know, Ashley, if you want to look at that before we send it out to everybody, but there is one that will help to explain the coverages around clinical trials.
Right. I will say from personal experience, we loved when patients had Medicare. I mean, you still have your copays and whatnot, but knock on wood somewhere, I've never had Medicare turn down partnering with the drug company. They're pretty good. They play nicely with others, but yeah, we definitely want to get that page up. So we'll do that.
Great.
Right. Next one is, I'm situated in Europe, Belgium. So do you know of centers that are working together with centers in Belgium, the Netherlands, France, or Germany?
I'm going to confess ignorance there. I'm sorry. When it comes on that side, we're really heavy on the U.S. side and working on some things into Canada. I wish I had a better answer. And Mel, if you want to chime in on anything you might be aware of, or Ashley on that side, I think, does the Center of Excellence, are there things that we can go country by country there, Ashley?
Yeah, so we have centers of excellence for sure in France and Germany. We were actually just in Germany not too long ago, and in France we had an international congress there. So I don't have like a listing of clinical trials by those centers. However, I have contacts there. So if you're interested in getting an appointment at one of those centers, we'd be happy to help you get set up, and then they can direct you into what has a trial closest. Great. And then this one's just a great tip. So LLS has financial assistance, drug companies have RX assistance, and other sites have transportation assistance, like the American Cancer Society. So agree, all of those are great. They all offer their own grants, and you can apply for those. If you have any questions about applying or can't get to them, let us know. We're happy to get you there. The next question, is there an equivalent to the MDS Foundation in Europe? Do you want me to take that one?
I would
Sure.
love
But okay.
from our side, we'd love that, Ashley. Thank you.
You're fine. So the MDS Foundation has centers of excellence there, but as far as like boots on the ground, we're part of the coalition, the MDS Alliance. And there are centers that are in Europe through there. So if you're looking for someone in a very specific location, let us know. We have people we can put you in contact with on that end that work to deliver resources and whatnot over there. All right. And next
And
one,
Ashley, I sent I sent a link to the Center of Excellence on there. And if for anyone listening, if you click on the international for that guest, there wasn't a name, but you can see ones Belgium, Netherlands. I don't remember all the countries they had asked about, but there's a nice map with that overlay of pins with those centers that have hit the Center of Excellence mark.
Yeah. And to put a shout out to SparkCures, you guys are phenomenal when we have international patients. So if you're international and you're on the call, if you call into them, even though it's not on their site, they do a great job of finding sites for you in your area. So even though it's not like top of mind, they will take that time and do that for you, even though it doesn't pull up automatically. So I just want to give a shout out to you guys for doing that because it's phenomenal and has helped a ton of people.
Thank
So
you.
next one, I have been with my hematologist for 20 years. We waited until my HBC or hemoglobin, I think, got to 7.5 to start treatment, which we have been on since January of 2023. How can I determine if there's a better center for my treatment?
I think that's a good question, and I think it kind of depends on some different factors, right? You have a hematologist that you've been with for a long time. I'm sure there's, some trust and a good relationship there. I think in terms of when we're looking at centers just by themselves, I mean, MDS does a ton of work with centers of excellence, and there's things like, is this, center running clinical research? I think it's a hard thing. It's an individual question. I don't know, Brian, anything you want to throw in there?
I guess I would say, yeah, I think on my side, Ken, the reason why it's such a hard question is, is your doctor, are you seeing an MDS specialist? Are you seeing more of a generalized oncologist, hematologist oncologist? And any of those things are okay. I guess what I would say is if what you're looking for is a second opinion to make sure that the treatment that you're on, are you looking for further validation or sort of challenging? Is it worth switching that up in some way, or is everything moving the way they would want it to be? I think getting a second opinion is always appropriate. And that's where we would look at those MDS centers of excellence to try to find the closest center that has, the cytogenetics, the clinical trials, the expertise, the peer research articles, and all the criteria that goes into making something a center of excellence. I think that it's always good. Our recommendation is for everybody is it's okay to receive treatment and get care locally and staying as close to home as you can from a quality of life perspective. Absolutely. But adding in a specialist is really is paramount. It's so incredibly important. Even if you're connecting with them once a year from a check-in side of things, they're going to be up to date on the latest research, on things that are happening, and you can sort of bounce those ideas and then return back home and still receive the care. But you have someone that's sort of, whether you want to call them the quarterback or the head coach or whatever analogy you'd want to use on that side, we'd really recommend that. I think the other side is if you're asking because the relationship is not great, that's kind of a different conversation to have. And that's what a lot of our phone conversations ultimately turn into, because there's no right or wrong. These are interpersonal and these are real people relationships. And doctors that some people love don't get along with other people, right? It's just like regular life. So I think it really depends on what you're looking to get out of that. But I think that the biggest takeaway would be if you're not seeing someone who is a specialist, it is absolutely okay and encouraged to go out there and bring a specialist onto your team, even if it's for once a year, once every 6 months, or whatever the need might be, check-ins and updates on that side.
Great answer. Feel free, we do have a few more minutes if you want to type a question in. I will ask a question just that I get frequently, and that is, can you speak to like the amount of time it takes for drug approval, right? You have to go through phase 1 all the way up. So how do you know like the time? How long does that take to get a drug out there and on the market?
Yeah, I think we've seen, there are some that can happen a little bit quicker, but I think the research is showing anywhere from like 6 to 12 years is typically what that's looking like. And I guess even longer if we talk about sort of the preclinical, like if we go back to the presentation there, the research and discovery phase is going to take time, and then we have to go into the clinical trials and then that review process. Although what we are seeing, in a lot of blood cancer and a lot of cancers in general, is that accelerated approval side, where the data is able to get that to patients quicker, and then you have the confirmatory trials after that. But I think I'm just kind of going through from the start of these trials. I mean, I would say luspatercept, or if we look at imetelstat, Do you know when the first trial, would you have recalling that, Ashley, when that might have started?
I know I worked on it in phase one in the past 10 years, but before coming to the foundation. So I would say within the 5 to 10 year ballpark is my guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and on the myeloma side, I mean, we had CAR Ts coming in around 2017, 2018, and then we were seeing approvals in like 23, right? So that's 6, 7 years. And that was sort of gangbusters on the myeloma side. I mean, CAR T, just the data and the results coming out of that were just so incredible. And even that was still 6 years from a trial side. So I would say on average, I think we're looking at about 5 to 10 once we get out of that, the petri dish side and we start going into actual people, human clinical trials is probably a good estimate or number to use.
Great. Anything else you got? Oh, Lisa, thank you so much for an informative webinar. I agree. It's one of our most informative
Oh,
we've
thanks,
had
Kathy.
quite some time. So
I,
any other,
Ashley, if I can say,
yeah, go
if I
ahead.
can hop in real quick, I would just love to say, what we really hoping to get across on this, or what I wanted everyone to see, is that it's this really wonderful, relationship with the MDS Foundation, that this handoff of how do we help people. So if you're calling about clinical trials and you're talking to Ashley or someone from the MDS Foundation, they're going to talk about SparkCures, and we want you to see who we are and how we can sort of help navigate. And we want to be able to say, listen, you can call the MDS Foundation for all these other, really great questions that you have. And we're just so appreciative of being a part of this community and being a part of this team. And we're going to keep growing and expanding what we can do. But there really is a lot of behind the scenes teamwork of how do we really help navigate patients and get them to the right people, whether it's getting them back to the MDS Foundation or getting them over to us or getting them to a center of excellence. So we just really, really appreciate that. And it's just been so wonderful, working and coordinating with the team and meeting all these incredible people. I know we don't get to see you guys, but some of those names coming across are definitely familiar. So it's great to be here with everybody. And we just really appreciate that.
Absolutely. We love our partnership with you guys. Very, very happy to work together.
Yeah, for sure.
Anything like final thoughts before we close it out?
Call
Final
us. We
thought?
love phone calls. We are here to help. Even if you're not looking to do a clinical trial, we're not here to, we're here just to help support you. So call us, email us, text us today, 3 months from now, whenever you feel comfortable, just know that we're here. And we really want to, talk through. We don't limit our phone calls. We're here to sort of be the support that you need and whatever that looks like. And you'll help us understand, what that looks like. So thank you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell people we don't work on commission, so we don't get any kind
That's
of
great. That's
kickback.
exactly
If
it.
you agree,
That's
you
right.
agree
That's right.
with it, or if you don't, we're good with
Yeah.
whatever you decide. All
We
right.
want to help you make a decision that works for you, not for pharma, not for your doctor, but for you and your family.
All right. With that being said, thanks everyone for attending. This webinar is recorded. It will be on our site, so you can review it in the past, or in the future, come up with questions that you may have missed in the past. Let us know what those are. And we would like to thank you again to our sponsors, so Bristol Myers Squibb, Gilead, Taiho, also to VJ Hemonk for helping us put all of this together. Thanks to my coworker Janice, who is kind of on behind the scenes as well. So any questions, comments, let us know. Otherwise, enjoy your weekend. Have a great day.
Thanks, Janice. Thanks, Ashley. Thanks, Mel. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.